Always trust.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Is that going to
From president eating his tie in the midst of a war to getting dragged off a roof, Mikheil Saakashvili was once widely recognized as an advocate for reform and democracy. A friend of the West, an enemy of Russia, Saakashvili became president of Georgia in January 2004. His popularity got him re-elected 4 years later despite accusations of electoral fraud. But Georgia's constitution prevented him from running for a third term in 2013. Saakashvili's party was defeated at the polls, and he left Georgia for Ukraine shortly afterwards, where he supported the 2014 revolution. He gained Ukrainian citizenship, although it meant losing his Georgian passport. Ukraine's president, Petro Poroshenko, appointed him governor of Odessa province. But he resigned in November 2016, accusing Poroshenko of corruption. A few days later, Saakashvili announced plans to create a new political force in Ukraine. But that didn't happen. The government revoked his Ukrainian citizenship in July last year. Stateless, Saakashvili was first sent to Poland, then to the Netherlands, where he now lives under temporary asylum status. Meanwhile, a court in Georgia found him guilty of abuse of power in connection with a 2006 murder case. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison in absentia. In Ukraine, a prosecutor accused Saakashvili of having connections with a suspected criminal gang led by Ukraine's former president, Viktor Yanukovych. So where does all of this leave the man who was once hailed as a champion of democracy? I'm Sami Zaidan in the Dutch capital. I've come to Amsterdam to discuss with Mr. Saakashvili his rise and fall and how he plans to continue his political career. Former Georgian President Mikheil Saakashvili talks to Al Jazeera. Former President of Georgia, former Governor of Odessa in Ukraine. Thanks so much for talking to Al Jazeera, sir.
Thank you for inviting me.
So you're now here in the Netherlands, but on April the 3rd, you spoke about how you want to return to Georgia. When will that happen?
Well, I think the entire region is going to change. The present artificial situation when oligarchs are running the show, sidelining the people, sidelining democracy, just making fun of the whole idea of the political process, it's very artificial.
But you can't return until that changes, right? Or else you would probably face arrest.
Except that I also bolster the change. I'm the only politician, maybe in the world that leads parties in 2 different countries. I have a party which I lead in Ukraine, and I have a party which I lead in Georgia, and I'm in permanent contact with them. Indeed, I spearheaded some of the campaigns there now. I came up with some initiatives, so I'm not standing still. I'm not just waiting for the moment to come. I'm trying to bring moment closer.
How do you remove oligarchs from power in places like Georgia, places like Ukraine, from here in the Netherlands?
It just cannot last. It is not sustainable. These guys are going to collapse. It's going to be a very difficult transition. Nothing is going to be bumpy, but it just cannot keep going like this.
Well, if that happens, if there is a collapse in Ukraine or Georgia, I mean, your personal ambitions, do you want to return to power? And if so, where? Because like you said, you're running political parties in 2 countries at the same time.
I would not really compare myself to Simon Bolivar, but I have to remind you that in other historical contexts, that historic figure led 5 Latin American countries. Now, different situation, not that kind of ambition, but countries are similar, challenges are similar, like it used to be in the times of Simon Bolivar. And we need to live up to that expectation.
But how would you respond, sir, to those who might say, you're not Simon Bolivar, you've lost power twice in 2 different countries? Those who say, are you able to make sound political calculations?
First, you are absolutely right. I'm not Simon Bolivar. But I'm someone who is different from what's happening in our region. Indeed, I had 2 terms of successful presidency. I finished it all.
And there were criticisms.
And look at the countries around us. Look at Armenia. Look at other neighbors. Look at Belarus. Look at, just wherever you look. These leaders extend their terms. They find other ways not to quit. I was the only one who had full extent of power and, first of all, quit, had peaceful transition when the constitutional term expired. That's quite unique, which comes natural in other places in the world. In our part of the world, some people think you are stupid and crazy if you do that. And second, you're more crazy according to these criteria because, I left without any riches, about any stealing anything. And that's also unfortunately very unusual in our part of the world. And in Ukraine, I left from governorship when I felt that we were no longer in the business of reforming the country. Rather, staying there would be just trying to whitewash something that cannot be justified. Mass-scale corruption and oligarchic rule.
In your second term as Georgian president, there were criticisms of your tactics, accusations that you tried to suppress opposition protests, that you'd acted in a heavy-handed way. Do you think any of those criticisms or accusations now in hindsight are justified, that you would have done things differently?
Look, Georgia was a failed country. You cannot make from a failed country just, through Scandinavian methods, overnight something looking like Sweden or Norway. Georgia has, under my watch, Georgia's economy has quadrupled. Georgia went from 127th place of doing business index of the World Bank to being the 9th place, the best place in the world to do business. That is to say, we eradicated corruption. We became the safest country in Europe and one of the safest in the world from being one of the criminal countries. Do you think you fight criminal, totally criminalized country and transform it into the safest country in Europe? Just not doing anything and just being, for instance, sweet to the criminals. And then,
but surely you need to abide by the rule of law, sir, right? You should abide by the human rights.
That's rule of law. That's rule of law, but rule of law applied for zero tolerance towards crime, and that's hard.
Is the opposition criminal?
Look, opposition ultimately won the elections, and we handed over the power. Georgia still has robust free media, which it always enjoyed on my rule. And don't forget, some of the propaganda against us, of course there were shortcomings, but it also was imposed by very strong presence of Russian propaganda that absolutely hated me. That now we know that Paul Manafort was hired by Deripaska in 2005 to write articles against us, specifically on democracy or so-called absence of democracy, starting from 2005. So we were running against a propaganda machine. Now, I'm not perfect. And of course, we had our mistakes. But when you have the nastiest machine specifically focused on killing the idea of Georgia's success case, not to give the soft power to the small nation that would transform the entire region, then you should always understand why some of the criticisms were voiced.
If the mafia and the oligarchs are still in power in Georgia, in Ukraine, but especially in Georgia, where you served as 2 terms as president, why should voters believe you now when you say, support my party, we'll make sure this time we'll unseat the oligarchs and the mafia?
My reform survived my presidency. I think the biggest task for the reformers is that when you quit, whether this thing is sustainable. Most of it is still there. So from that standpoint, public services, absence of corruption, safety, I left good legacy, and legacy is still intact. From that standpoint, we come back, basically we come back with all the experience of successes. No other, people in Georgia have seen what the success looks like. That's the difference with Ukraine. In Ukraine, no government since independence has demonstrated any success whatsoever.
I wonder if we can go back in time a little bit and talk about some of the highlights, I guess. This year, 2018, is the 10th anniversary of the war between Georgia and Russia. Do you reflect back on it at all and say, maybe I made a mistake in starting that war with Russia?
Well, I didn't start war with Russia in first place.
Well, that was the EU report of September 2009.
Look,
were they wrong?
Look, if somebody interprets that report, they're like this, that's flat wrong. Look,
this is a quote from it. The report found that you'd started the war because of, quote, a penchant for acting in the heat of the moment.
Look, there is only one choice when your country gets attacked by 100 times bigger neighbor, either to surrender or to fight. And we chose not to surrender.
So hang on, then the EU was wrong when they said again, quote, in that report of September the 30th, there was no ongoing armed attack by Russia before the start of the Georgian operation.
No, the EU report said Russian troops were already inside our territory, and if you don't call it armed attack, then what the hell is the armed attack? Okay, there was no armed attack in Crimea after that. Russia just came in,
I think they're referring to maybe the presence of Russians in
Exactly.
South Ossetia.
No,
Everyone
yes.
would know, but they were saying they were not in an aggressive
Russian army was
posture.
inside the territory just exactly the same way they were in Crimea, except that Ukraine chose not to react and not to fight, and Georgia chose to fight.
So they were. So hang on, you're telling me basically the West was playing politics with your situation when they said again in the quote of the report, Georgian claims of a large-scale presence of Russian armed forces in South Ossetia prior to the Georgian offensive could not be substantiated.
Look,
were they pretending
well,
like they
now
were?
it can be substantiate everything. The only thing that they were turning blind eye on then because they thought this situation will not continue. Now we have a situation when every time they have to react. The problem is the lack of leadership. You know, great leaders like Europe had, for instance, like when Mitterrand was there, Thatcher was there, you know, Wilfred Martens was there, Lubbers was there, it's gone. We have just tacticians in Europe. We have lack of leadership in Europe. Nobody wants to assume responsibility. As a result, Putin was playing them around. It's not about Putin being so strong. It's about this kind of leaders being so weak. You know,
Do you think they're still weak
absolutely,
today?
Europe. There is no leadership in Europe of today. It's so bleak, and it's, you know, we see, you know, half engagement, semi-engagement. Now, fortunately, at least Theresa May reacted, and she mobilized everybody else to react. But back in 2008, that was exactly the opposite. Back in 2008, they didn't want to hear anything about upcoming threats. And you know, now who is crazy and who wasn't? I think they were crazy when they didn't listen to me, and when they thought I was crazy. And you know, and the Russians were playing into that. Look at this crazy Saakashvili. You know, he's saying all these stupid claims. And who made stupid claims now? Everything I warned about happened. Right. And I hate to be Cassandra. But if Europeans continue to be as weak as this, we are not going to avoid big war in Europe, because right now, even I was at the Munich Security Conference, this time generals, the same generals that were downplaying Russian thing in 2008 are saying, well, Russia is really becoming dangerous.
Let's skip forward. In 2015, you decided to go to Ukraine. You accepted a Ukrainian passport, a move which you knew would mean you lose your Georgian citizenship. I'm wondering why, if, as you said, in April the 3rd of 2018, that you're committed to, quote, not leaving the Georgian people in despair, and you want to end the rule of the oligarchs there.
Because Georgia's fate is also decided by what happens in Ukraine. I went to the region of Odessa, which is extremely important strategic region.
Did you think you could change Georgia, though, by being the governor of Odessa?
Odessa, if Odessa would have fallen, Georgia would have been finished off, because Odessa is on the Black Sea.
Fallen from whom, though? At the time, the president...
It was, when I went there, it was on the brink of being fallen into the fold of the Russians. It was obvious. It's a region with very strong separatist presence, with very weak government power by that moment, very precarious security situation to the point when nobody really wanted to go into that business of becoming Odessa governor. Well, I volunteered to go there after several high-profile Ukrainians declined that office, and because they thought Odessa would fall.
Why did President Petro Poroshenko ask you, do you think, and give you citizenship? Was it down to your personal relationship with him?
No, I think because Poroshenko, before running for Ukrainian president, he said that his role model for reforms were two countries, Singapore and Georgia, under my rule. And he thought that by bringing me into Ukraine, he would, bolster his reformers' credentials in the eyes of the West and in the eyes of the Ukrainian public. Now, he did it.
Well, what went wrong then?
Because he was not serious about the reforms. Because ultimately, he had to make a choice whether to get into Ukraine's historic textbooks, or to become higher on the list of Forbes billionaires list. He decided to get into billionaires list rather than the textbooks.
I'm wondering how you personally feel, though, now looking, or at the time actually, because this was the man who'd brought you to Ukraine. Yes. He'd given you citizenship, made you a governor, and then you say you felt at some point that he wasn't living up to the reformist ideals. Did you feel conflicted at any point in turning against the man who'd been a friend for you?
I think it took me quite some time to make that decision. It is a hard decision to make, not because of personal loyalties, but just admitting that our expectations were high and we just failed to basically they failed to materialize. It's hard to imagine. It's hard to live through it because it's not. I never create. I don't believe in personal loyalties of that sort. I never brought my family members or my classmates or anybody for that purpose in Ukraine or Georgia to power. That was never my goal. I believe in meritocracy. I believe in recruiting new people, and so I never had my clan. Poroshenko tried to, in a way, Poroshenko maybe saw me as part of his clan, and obviously that was a big misreading of what I stand for. And at a certain moment when he told me just go and fundraise, that was his quote, with the Ukrainian local businesses. Fundraise, that's to say get bribes.
How would you respond, though, to those, as you know, there are allegations against you of being, you've mentioned some of them involved in criminal activities in Ukraine. There's charges against you in Georgia for misspending public money, ordering the breakup of protests, ordering the beating up of an opposition lawmaker. There's even a conviction for you related to a murder case.
Look.
Is there any truth to any of those allegations?
Look, first of all, Freedom House just published a report saying that this is a pure political vendetta, and that's what it is. Even Georgian government that basically hired 10 best retired Western investigators to look for my offshore accounts, properties, villas, whatever, couldn't find anything and came up with ridiculous charges that every penny I spent as a president on performing presidential functions were money misspent when Georgia's economy quadrupled and my former defense minister whom I fired for corruption testified that I ordered him to beat up somebody and the guy said beforehand, I'll just give any testimony against Saakashvili because I hate him, and that's the only witness. So that's why international organizations are not taking this serious. That's why I'm freely moving around the world.
Let's skip forward to December 2017 when we had those very dramatic pictures of you on the rooftop of your Kiev home. It's not often that you have an ex-president standing on a rooftop threatening to jump. Take us through the minutes and the hours that led up to that moment.
Something like 6 in the morning, 100-something heavily armed security troops broke into my apartment. And obviously they could have arrested me anywhere else. I moved around without guards. Just walk into public cafe and just arrest me or.
So why do you think they tried to move?
Well, that was pure intimidation to show everybody who supported us that if they could go even after me, they could go after everyone. So, and then when they did it, I needed to win time. And
so you went to the roof. Were you really going to jump from the roof?
No, absolutely not. I'm not suicidal. I've never been suicidal. What happened is that, what I told them...
So was it a threat?
No, what I told them, if they approached me, we would all fall because it was basically a slippery roof. But why I went there? Because they jammed my telephone and we need time to mobilize. And so I went to the roof from which I could text my messages. I text my messages to our supporters. Thousands of people mobilized, but it took them time to get there. And in the end, they freed me from police cars.
Were you surprised when people opened a police van and managed to pull you out?
No, I was not, because people knew the whole arrest was unjust. Later, the local judge went against the system and she ruled. And she was reprimanded after that for that it was pure kidnapping.
You've managed to upset a lot of authorities in Georgia, Ukraine, Vladimir Putin. Do you ever think that your personal safety might be an issue?
Look, Vladimir Putin promised to hang me by softer parts of my body. As we know, this guy when I last met him, he told me, your Western friends give you lots of nice promises, they never deliver. I don't promise you anything nice, but remember, I always deliver. I remember these words coupled with his threat to kill me. But on the
This was from Vladimir Putin to you directly?
Absolutely. And then he said publicly...
When was this, sir?
That was the February of 2008, our last meeting with him. And actually, and that was, this is a guy who likes to deliver on his
What
threats.
did you understand from that? Did you feel like you were being
threatened
with physical
liquidation? When we came out, I was less worried about personal threats towards me. I told my people, he's menacing us with war, and war happened a few months later. And I told the Westerners, Vladimir Putin menaced us with war, and he says, well, he just menaces. Now, the same people that say, He's just menacing. He's just, that's his way of cajoling words. Have to resign themselves to the realities that I was right and they were wrong about warning about Putin. Putin always creates new red lines, crosses them, and then creates new ones. Now, having said that, it's not about me.
That doesn't make you a personal target, though, as you said, from
It does.
Vladimir Putin
Absolutely.
saying,
Look,
according to an advisor to the French president in 2018, that he will hang you by the genitalia.
Yeah, that's exactly what's it. And then when I was asked by a journalist what I thought about it, I joked that, he would not, he's not tall enough to get to me. But that's obviously not a nice thing to joke about. Because
when you hear of cases like Sergei Skripal
Yes,
in the
yes,
UK, does that not make you stop and think?
Look, I ride around Amsterdam on a bike. I don't have any bodyguards. I was asked by Dutch police whether I needed special protection, and I told them no. I declined it. Look, I believe that whatever happens, I've made my impact on history of this region. For sure, nobody can dispute that. If Putin wants to physically get me, I don't think any bodyguards can protect it anyway. Every time I would board a presidential plane in Georgia after 2008, every time we would be on the target list of Russian air defenses system, and it would show on our system. So when it happened first time, head of my bodyguard said, "What are we doing? Are we just driving?" I said, "No. If we succumb to their threat, they are going to paralyze us. We fly even if we are one button push away from being downed," and they never pushed the button. So, I'm still around.
But you thought it could have been a real possibility?
Absolutely, because Putin, look at what happened to President of Poland, whatever you say. But many people, including myself, believe that it's connected with his support of Georgia during the war, with him coming to Tbilisi in 2008, in August of 2008. So if Kaczynski, or if many Poles believe, died because of that, you can imagine that he came to support me. And
of course, the Russians, no doubt, would deny that. I'm wondering, how do you respond to the allegation that would come from the other side that says you are simply a tool of change on the part of the West?
Look, I think that's overblown. I think we have two different forces here. We have, on the one hand, we have Russia that exports chaos in the entire region. I'm sure that, first of all, they generated chaos in our part of the world. They generated chaos in Syria because they want Syrian refugees to go to Europe and destabilize Europe. Putin is calculating this very shrewdly.
Did you ever receive support, as they say, from EU or
yes,
US
on the other hand,
non-governmental organizations?
So on the one hand, we have Russia that has very clear policy of exporting chaos and implementing. On the other hand, we have rather chaotic policy on the part of the West. So Russia is exporting chaos, and Western very unchaotically and very diligently, and the West is responding in a very chaotic way.
Do you think any of these friends in the West today support you making a political comeback?
Look, not that I've been asking for instruction from anybody. I've been uncomfortable for many people, precisely for the reasons that I've not. Look, for instance, like Obama administration wanted us to agree to Russia's WTO membership. And we've been refusing for almost 2 years. President Obama called me, sent me a letter. My friend Hillary pushed very hard. I said, wait a minute. You are a big country, you solve your issues. We're a small country, we have small issues. But until they are solved, even if the President of the United States keeps me calling every day, I'm not going to do it because that's legitimate. These are our legitimate claims. And in the end, you know what had happened? Russians had to give in. And so from that standpoint, I've not been comfortable even for the France. Now, I wouldn't equate those two. From my values lay here where, where whatever the Western world exists. But on the other hand, I would always stand up for my national interests, and I'm not just easy person to be around with, even for big players. Once Henry Kissinger told Sarah Palin, Saakashvili is like a very uncomfortable poker player coming to big players table all the time, without cards in his pocket. Well, that's his vision. It's not about games. It's not about cards. It's about your heart, where it lies. And it lies with justice and with my own nation's interest. In this case, two nations' interests, Ukraine and Georgia, Georgia and Ukraine.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Mikheil Saakashvili, talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you so much.